G'day, and welcome back to the Spirited Speaker series, where we ask industry experts and creative geniuses questions that matter to you, especially during these challenging and very changing times. Ed Stenning here, Marketing Director of Travel Retail at Beam Suntory, and I do apologise for my very shabby state again. This isolation beard really has to go. Anyway, tonight I'm catching up for a virtual drink with one of the industry's most famous faces and names, Martin Moodie. Martin is the founder and chairman of the Moodie Davitt Report and also a very, very proud Kiwi. So, Martin, thanks for joining us for a virtual beverage, mate. What do you think the travel retail space will look like post-COVID? And what can retail teams and brand leaders do to prepare for the short term and the long term?
A very difficult question, of course. We're seeing a transformation of the travel landscape and therefore the travel retail landscape to a degree that no one, I think, frankly, could have seen possible. You know, the whole oxygen of travel retail, which is passengers and passenger growth, has been taken away, albeit briefly. And so if we do look beyond the current crisis, how will retailers, how will brands operating in airports attract perhaps a slightly wary consumer in the early days, at least until confidence returns, perhaps until a vaccine is out there? So I think those are important questions. I think you will have heard lots of other views, so I'm just going to focus on the senses, which I think are very important. Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Those crucial senses that drive our everyday life, and those senses are so important to the way we sell the kind of goods that we sell in the duty-free industry. And how will those senses be played out in terms of the interaction between the brand, the retailer, the promotional staff, and the customer going forward? A big question, isn't it? Because some of those senses are going to be compromised in the early days. Touch, quite possibly. Touch so important to fashion goods in particular, but even on a more basic level, reaching for that sample of fine single malt, touching one of those rather basic little tasting glasses that you see on the trays in Heathrow Airport, for example. People may well be wary of that. Smell, you've got to get up close to nose that really nice bourbon. Are you going to do that? Smell and aroma are so important to the fragrance sector. One has to touch to taste, and all these interacting senses, smell, and so on. So you've got to work with what you've got. How to sum all this up, really? I've covered this industry for a long time. I believe that while this is a crisis unprecedented in our industry's history, that better times will return relatively quickly. There'll be a phasing about that, of course. There'll be the pre-vaccine phase. There'll be a slow return to travel. And it will be not a universal return. It will be between countries and nationalities that consider each other safe, I would think. So we might see a return to, for example, down in my country, if Australia gets things under control, then we might see Australasian travel start to kick off again, kind of what the Kiwis are calling bubble travel. And I think we'll hopefully at least see that between Korea and China. That's important, obviously, to all of us in the travel retail trade. So there'll be those limited bubble travel groupings start to take shape. But over time, life will improve, confidence will come back, a vaccine will be found, and we must not lose sight of that goal. It's very important. So I think we sell great products, don't we? Now, I'm drinking a glass of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, Beam Suntory. You make, some of the great spirits of the world. We need to talk about those. If we can't get the consumer in the short term to be able to touch, to be able to smell, and to be able to taste, then we've got to let them know very strongly before they get to the airport what they can find at the airport, where they can find it, how they can find it quickly, and maybe without much human interaction. They may be wary of that human interaction. So, as many people have said, that whole digital omni-channel play becomes really, really important. Reaching the customer before they get to the airport, telling them about all the great offers you've got. All this stuff was important anyway, but now it's even more important. But don't forget the sensorial. I think that will continue to matter in the future. After all, it is about the touch and the taste and the smell of that, the experience of that great whiskey or bourbon that you make. And so, I think it'll all come around in time, but for now, we're just going to have to do things in a slightly different way. I'm still going to want to walk into that duty-free store. I know what I like to buy. For example, I tend to buy wines and spirits. I often buy destination merchandise. Now, I might not be so swayed by promotional stuff in the short term, but I'll still look for education on single malt. I'll still look to find out really quality information about the product you're selling me. And ultimately, of course, I'm looking forward to the pleasure of drinking it. I wish anyone who could stick with all that, that they come out of this, their business comes out of this in the near term. I'm sure it will, and that everyone who's watching remains safe and well. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Really positive messages there that we can use to pull through this together. The whole team here really appreciate you taking the time to connect, mate, and share with what we must do in the short and long term to bring travel retail back and make it stronger than ever before. So, big cheers, mate. Anyway, that's a wrap from Martin and I in our very separate COVID bunkers. But don't forget, if you have someone in the industry you'd love to hear from in the Spirited Speaker series, let us know and we'll do our best to tee it up. In the meantime, cheers and thanks for joining us.